Out of every 100 children in the United States, about 3 of them have a disruptive behavior disorder. The cause is unknown. Things that increase the risk for them are child abuse, neglect, a traumatic life experience such as sexual abuse or violence, the loss of a family member, such as those who have been in foster care or adoption, or a family history of a disruptive behavioral disorder. This week on The Real Juggle, I speak with a fellow mom about parenting children with a disruptive behavioral disorder. Please know that today we'll focus on the parenting side of the equation, the parenting perspective. Sometimes love alone just isn't enough. And it's a unique juggle to not only work, but to live each day with unpredictable behaviors, outbursts, physical and verbal aggression, often not being able to keep childcare in place. Calls from the school or children's services become normal. You lose friends, sometimes even family, because you often have to break promises, miss events, or even stop going to church because your child's behavior just isn't socially acceptable. It's exhausting. Sometimes it's lonely, even if you have tons of people around you. On Monday mornings, when people ask the normal question of how was your weekend, you spare them the details and you just lie. It was great. How about yours? God forbid you relive your weekend. You spend countless hours researching therapies, programs, schools for your child in a world with very few resources to support the needs of the myriad of children who are suffering with this trauma-based behavioral disorder. And when you do find something, it's often not covered by insurance and easily costs $300 to $600 a day. That's $10,000 to $18,000 per month. Who could even afford that for a week, let alone the 12 to 18 months that they generally recommend? There are no quick fixes. The kids don't want to do the things that they do most of the time, and often they regret it after. But the trauma, the fear, the reactivity runs so deep, the cycle just repeats. So I ask you to please have an open mind as you watch or listen to today's episode. I'm grateful that Susan agreed to join me today. And I hope that this episode is informative for you and maybe even encourages you to seek out ways that you can support parents dealing with similar struggles. So I want to thank you so much, Susan, for joining me today for this really, really important conversation. Why don't we just start out by you sharing a little bit with everyone about yourself and your background?
Sure. Susan Pasella. I am a wife of 21 years, and I have 4 children. We had 2 biologically and 2 we brought in through adoption. We live in Gap, Pennsylvania, so Lancaster County. My neighbors are Amish. Yes, I'm a speech pathologist by education, but I actually have my own consulting business right now, and that's basically me.
Awesome. Good to know. So it was probably really helpful, at least early on, for you to have a background in speech pathology. Did that kind of help you in raising your kids, or did you reference any of those skills?
Absolutely. It helped me know what was generally developmentally appropriate versus what is something that is kind of in the gray area, and then what is not, like when to seek additional help professionally. But I think sometimes I knew too much. So sometimes I was probably a little maybe hyper about a few things. So yeah, I definitely needed to put on a mom hat versus that professional hat pretty intentionally.
Yeah, it was probably much better than the WebMDs that many of us get. So I'm sure you were ahead of the game. So,
Exactly.
so as an adoptive mom myself, and for years I did foster parenting, my experience as a parent from having biological children versus fostering or adopting, totally different. And I think that's largely because of the trauma that children who have been in the system or have had that loss from their biological parents, it just creates its own set of needs that are really, really unique for people that parent kids who are adopted. So can you share a little bit just about just take us on the journey about some of the experiences that you've had as an adoptive parent?
Sure. And yeah, I think that that's a really interesting piece to bring out, that if you do have biological children, you not only share DNA, but we are really prone to, like, whenever we see things come out in our children, whether it's positive or negative, we might say, oh, that reminds me of Aunt so-and-so, or, oh, that's just like your father, or like, we already have those natural bridges of connection and attachment. So that can be really hard with children that you've brought into your family who don't have that, what I think most people take for granted as some of that innate connection. And so it definitely was an interesting dynamic of bringing kids into our family. We adopted at age 3 and 6. So older, already with a lot of personality, but also exposure to complex trauma. And so our boys, even before they had language, and this is where that speech pathology part comes in, having language to be able to express trauma, it's so powerful and important for giving the brain a chance to cope. And just that getting it out verbally is so important. So with our boys in particular, they had trauma before they had language. So they really struggle to this day to express the sadness and the feeling of not connecting or having an identity with our family. They feel lost.
And a lot of adults, if you think about it, a lot of adults have difficulty articulating trauma or difficult feelings, big feelings, as we tell our kids a lot, right? Articulating big feelings. So we can imagine that the kids are going to have similar struggles. Yeah. So, one of the things that I thought was important, and I shared, talked about a little earlier, is I really wanted to focus this conversation on our experience. As you know, on the juggle, as adoptive parents, as parents in general, we have a lot that we're balancing in our lives, right? Between what we need to do and what we have to do. And very often when you have children with complex emotional issues or diagnoses, it just exacerbates things and makes it more difficult. What I don't think is that the general public has a real appreciation for what that looks like for us. It's not just the typical defiance, disobedience, teenage, phase. It's a lot more involved than that. So can you share a little bit around how raising children with really, really, with diagnoses or really, really strong trauma issues has been different?
Yeah, I think when you've had, at least in my experience, my 2 biological kids in the womb, shaping starts to occur. I think a lot of people don't understand that trauma can be prenatal and is often prenatal. So I think with our experience is that it can actually be very embarrassing when you're out in public and people can look at you like, don't you know how to parent your kids? Or can't you control him? Especially with big tantrums, eloping, so that running away just out of nowhere, swiping shelves, just these impulsive reactions to
the things you see on TikTok or on,
yeah, I mean, and not recognizing that we could be walking through Walmart, for instance, and there was a person who reminded our son of his birth mother, or a smell that actually triggered deep in his core, in the back of his brain, a memory that he can't articulate, but knows that was a time where he was completely unsafe and was being harmed. And so I think when those things spike on the outside as a parent, you almost have to stop caring what other people think, because you know your kids best, or you're trying to get to know your kids as they're learning themselves. And so from a parent standpoint, I think you really, even more than with biological kids, you have to just let go of other people's opinions and figure out times to gently educate when you get into contact with people who really just don't know.
Right. And, you know, when you do have a safe space of people that you could talk to where you share, this is what happened, or this is what I'm seeing, or guess what, you know, XYZ child did today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know about you, but I've gotten that reaction. Well, just send them to me for a week. just
Oh
send them
my
to me
gosh.
for
If he
a
was
few
my
days.
child, you know, there'd be like, you know, the referencing to like, oh, it just takes a good spanking, or, you know, timeout, which we know timeout is very
Triggering.
polarizing for our kids. And they actually are like, fine, you know, for kids that struggle with attachment issues, putting them in timeout simply verifies what they are believing in their core. People will leave me and all I have is myself. So having to do time in, it just looks so contrary to typical good parenting.
Right. And you know what's interesting is that the patience, the level of patience that you have to go through this, and forgiving yourself for not being patient all the time, because this isn't just 1 or 2 episodes. Like you said, the trip to the Walmart, this is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I've had this conversation with parents like ourselves, and everything from locks on the refrigerator, not from a punitive standpoint, but to make sure that you don't wake up with like ketchup on your face, or like, you know, liquids strewn around the house, or something spoiling. Cameras in our homes, just to make sure that not only your child is safe, but that all your children are safe and that you're safe, to make things happen. So it puts, as a parent, it puts you in a hyper vigilant state. And it almost creates, I don't know if you've experienced, but a trauma for yourself. I have lost myself, friends, and people that I considered family, because, you know, I had to blow off an event at the last minute. Actually, blow off is the wrong term. I had to cancel attending something at the last minute, and they took it personally, but it's because, you know how it is.
Yeah.
You can't time it. You're dealing with these issues. So I know, as a married person, how has it affected? I always said if I were married, I'd already be divorced, because I don't know if how it would be, but can you share how it's impacted your relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think with, again, parenting biological children, you're going to naturally have differences from one parent to another. And then as soon as you throw in an element of neither of you really fully understanding what's going on, and I also think you draw so much from what your own experiences were for how you were parented, but most of those are just not going to work. And so I know for my husband and I, we just had a really simple tap out when one of us was getting heated, because there are just days where you don't remain under control as a human. And it was just, for some reason today, whatever is going on is, I am at my breaking point. And so we would just go, hey babe, tap, tap, like on the shoulder. I've got this. Generally, one of us was able to stay more under control.
Right.
And just, yeah. And I think we constantly communicating with each other, and really being willing to say to, you know, to the other, I think you're off on this. I think, you know, trying to, and give reasons, and make it so that you are a unit. You can't let your kids pit you against each other. So constant checking in, I think that's good parenting advice anyway, but just constant checking in of, what do you think? What did you say about this? I need to talk to mom, I need to talk to dad.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's
times. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I can see how this could be a really big wedge in a marriage relationship.
Right. And then the other thing is, folks who say, well, just love them, just love him, just love them as much as you can love them, and love conquers all, and love is going to fix it. Have you heard that? I know I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. Or, oh, good thing kids are so resilient. That's my favorite. Yeah, that bothers me so much, because I think it really discounts the trauma that our kids have experienced, even if their only trauma, in quotes, is that they are not with their family of origin. Let's say everything was just fine. That's huge. And it's not, there's, to their core, they're going to have feelings of abandonment, or why was I, in a sense, given away, given up? I mean, even if they're in the most wonderful family. So I think that those kinds of statements really like
diminish the true experience.
Yes, exactly. And most of it is meant well. Like
Right.
I've had people say, "Oh, it's so good that, you and your husband, these kids are so lucky."
Thank
And
God for you. Yeah.
I'm like, they're not lucky. Like they went through, like, I don't know if I can say it, like they went through, the worst of the worst as children and not even as adults, like they haven't even gotten there yet. So yeah, I would say those, don't say that to anybody who's listening or watching. Like, yeah, it's thankfully we are learning that the brain is able to
Yeah.
form new patterns, but
But it takes
a lot
time.
of work.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a lot of work and it takes time. And so I just want to be careful saying that. You and I both know this, but we recognize that although it's addressable, it's something that is addressable over a time period that the average person, you know what I mean, does not even like respect or recognize. It's not just 6 months or just a year or just, it is a lifelong journey. If you talk to folks with reactive attachment disorder who are adults, they still struggle with some of the ability to connect. And so it's definitely a marathon. It's beyond a marathon. One of the things that I wanted to chat about too was just the nature of reactive attachment disorder or just attachment issues in general, because so often, like, it's not a full diagnosis. It's just the recognition that there are attachment issues that need to be addressed, because our therapists and psychiatrists are getting anecdotal inputs, right? And they're looking at behaviors over time. So it's hard to just meet a few times and make the diagnosis. But one of the things that's characteristic is the manipulation. So even though they love you, you're close to your kids and you're connected, that they often act out with the folks that are closest to them, because even though they want the connection, they also are testing you to see if it's real. So they up the ante in what they do to push you away, to see if I do this, if I burn the house down, like literally I've had issues with, if I burn the house down, would you hate me then? Would you push away? So do you see some of that as well? The push pull?
And I think it's really important to mention that what we're talking about is kids with underdeveloped brains in general. So you have normal biology where you have, for instance, a boy, their frontal part of their brain, their frontal cortex is not fully developed until their early to mid 20s. Then throw in all of this, like that we're asking them to juggle. So I think that that's important to mention. But yes, I mean, we have realized with our one son, who is currently in a wilderness program, that he is manipulative, but I don't think he even knows that he is. Yeah. I think what he is, and so it can be so difficult to even try to, in a sense, call him out on what we're seeing, because I don't really even know that he realizes he's doing it himself.
Behavior is natural for them, and we kind of like encapsulate it and put a label on it to try to define it or have it make sense to us. But you're right. It's so natural.
And we've even said that, like, he is one of the best gaslighters we know. But he literally can make you start to feel like you're going crazy, because what you are watching, is true, but then you're being told that's not what's happening. It's a very, I don't know if you've had that experience as well. It just is a very unsettling way to live.
It's just weird because you can go head to head and say, no, that this is what happened. No, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. But it's true on both sides, because you begin to think like that's actually what they believe. Perception. Yes, yes. So you can't fight someone on what it's sort of like green dress, blue dress. The people who saw the green dress, was it green and blue or blue and gold, whatever it was, the people who saw one color, like literally saw that color. And that exactly is a brain perception, right? It's how your brain connects with your eyes. I think, and I want to focus on kind of our experience. I think there should be some thought put to the triangulation that happens, even though it's natural, to the impact on the family unit. So not just, their parents, but also their siblings. When they do things to triangulate, they make up things at school, and then the teachers are mandated, and then you have to have conversations, and then eventually, for healthy families, that stuff goes away. But just going through that process, I don't know if you've experienced that, but that can be very, very unsettling.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, from our personal experience, it's been more the trying to help the child, our one son in particular, in when he's actively still in crisis. And so trying to help him, but then also not only help our other three kids with normal life, but then put on top of it the strain and the stress that they carry watching the rest of these
Right.
dynamics play
Because
out.
it's connected. It's not one person's going through this and other person's going through. It is interconnected. Yeah.
And so trying as a parent to be all things to each of these people is, I mean, truly, I had to stop feeling guilty about it when I had to drop everything else because all of my energy was going to, it just felt like I was keeping everybody else's head above water.
Yeah.
And yeah, just trying to figure out my role and my how to mother each of these people where they are. It was just, and it's so unique. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very draining.
So
Very.
how do you participate in self-care? Because part of the reason I created the Real Juggle is because I feel like we all juggle different responsibilities, but it's a unique situation when you're parenting children with special needs. It's like its own juggle. And so I wanted to bring awareness to what we know, which is there are so few pediatric psychiatry services. Many of them will lump them because there's so few. If you meet the age criteria, your kids are in there with, they usually separate out the sexual issues or pyromania, but they're in there with, children with a myriad of issues. And then you've got the exposure problem, right? When you're trying to get help. But similarly, there are so few resources for us as parents. If you go online, those of you listening and watching, and you look for therapists who specialize in reactive attachment disorder, they are few and far between. There's a lot of talk around trauma-informed care, but there's not as many services available around attachment and what that looks like and the trauma of the attachment loss. And so just from your vantage point, talk to me about like your experience with hospitalizations or seeking out resources for the kids.
Yeah, so I would say, thankfully, with our church has been a really amazing source of support. We have several other families that have adopted through foster care, in particular, and so we try to stay connected, either meeting once a month. Or just through text. It may seem really simple, but we reach out to each other just to say, oh my goodness, I'm having a day, or this is what's going on. And I think that text thread would blow people's minds with what these parents are shouldering and handling, including, like you already mentioned, like calling in children and youth that, statements were made, reports were filed, like, and just the heaping on of the added stress. As far as other resources, we also found after our adoptions that the resources that we had for post-adoption through our county were pretty poor.
Thank you for watching the first part of our two-part series on parenting children with complex behaviors.
They actually just added more stress. They had to come to our house when all the kids were there, and it was to the point where my husband said, I think it would be better if you left.
If you can relate, please visit therealjuggle.com and click on the microphone icon to share your story or what your experience is. I'd be happy to include you. I think the more of us that speak to this topic, the more impetus and momentum we'll have in getting additional resources for our children. Please visit therealjuggle.com and sign up so that you can get alerted when the next episode is available. In the meantime, be kind, be a blessing, and be yourself.